Five, four,
Ah!
and here we are. So, hello and welcome to the first episode of Taking Liberties
Taking
for the year
liberties.
2015. So today, we've got myself, Vikas, here in Canberra. Austen, say hi.
Hi.
He's in Sydney. Lara,
What up, mother flippers?
in Perth. Lee, who's also in Perth,
Awesome.
doing a fist. Not realizing that sound doesn't propagate if you do a fist.
Well, I'm here. Okay, I'm here. Hi.
And we've also got Zeev in Melbourne.
Hello. How
So-
are we all?
Yes, and we got a pretty good set of topics for the first episode for this year. Well, I don't know, it could be a bit morbid considering what's happened in the last week, but I figure we'd start by talking about the latest happenings in Paris, right?
Je suis Charlie.
Yeah. So I wanted to say, what is the role of terrorism in your mum's speech? No, just kidding. What can I say? This is just what I have written down. But
Look, domestic
obviously,
terrorism
what
is a serious problem, Vikas.
it is a very serious problem. But
No room for making jokes about people's mums here.
Well, look, this is the free speech episode, and frankly, I find my mum hilarious as well as all of yours, so I think it's appropriate.
my mum.
None of you know my mom.
Yeah.
I don't have to. I know what she made.
Also, what is a mum? Is that like a mom, but for Australians?
Yes.
Yes.
Whoa. Them fighting words, Yankee. Anyway. So,
Right, let's mute him.
but to get back to the topic, I mean, the argument's been made several times that hey, look, these guys published an offensive cartoon, they had a terrorist attack against them. Is this just the logical consequence of basically saying you have a right to be offended?
Well, my belief is that one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. I certainly wouldn't count this as an instance of fighting for freedom, but that is to say that I guess in some contexts there's a libertarian case for the initiation of force.
Wait. Are we saying that the cartoonist violated NAP?
No, but I don't think you'd find a lot of libertarians who would disagree with the American Revolution, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
Well-
but that's not just about publishing mean cartoons or satirical
Yeah.
cartoons. So
I'd say the whole taxation without representation probably had a big deal in the American Revolution.
Exactly, which is why I don't
To
think
be honest, I think we published newer
Freedom,
cartoons
the
than
argument
English
for
did
it.
during that time period.
What? Try again, Austin? You went really
I think
quiet.
our cartoons were meaner than the British during that time
Yeah.
period, that's all.
yeah. I mean, like as we sort of said at the start, like before we started recording, like there's an obvious link between satire and between these cartoons, between what they published and the attack. So it's not just like some random coincidence that this happened. And I think,
is it a pretext, though?
well,
In what
I think it is. I don't think it is, but regardless, in some ways, it doesn't. It's almost irrelevant because the reality is they did it anyway. You know, I could say it's not a pretext. It's not a moral pretext to be attacked. But what do they care? They're Muslim. You know, they're Muslim extremists who go around killing people. Like, so there is a link, but it's whether it's whether people should be stopped from publishing cartoons in future. Is like that's the policy? You know, is that the right policy response? Well, no, because it isn't actually their fault that they got attacked. Like it was, it's the responsibility lies on the terrorists who did what they did.
And it's not necessarily going to make them any safer. If we look at the incidents that came after Charlie Hebdo, you have the attack on the kosher grocery, which, as far as we know, was not publishing icons of the Prophet or of Allah. Their crime was being a Jewish business and being likely to have Jewish patrons. So we could, in the name of safety, try to take away people's liberty and provide security by telling them they can't depict the Prophet or depict other things that are offensive to Islamists or to other groups. But it's not actually going to make them any safer because there's always another excuse.
I mean, that was a
In fact,
similar
that
sort of
excuse
thing.
could also be their safety.
Yeah. There's a similar sort of thing with like the whole Benghazi thing, like without getting into, but like the notion that people got really upset.
What happened,
about,
Hillary?
really upset about like some video and then attacked the U.S. embassy. Like it's like these, they didn't, that might have been their stated reason, but in the end, they hated America anyway, so they just kind of just did whatever they wanted.
I'm not quite sure that that's really the reason. I mean, nobody had really heard of or watched this cartoon. But anyway, the YouTube video anyway. Vikas is being so controversial. Is it Vikas?
I think there's no Muslim extremists watching us right now.
Yes, thank goodness.
Well, unfortunately, nobody will be able to watch this. Maybe I'll release like a DVD where they can see the video.
Yes,
Special extras.
Yeah. We do. You mentioned where you live, Vikas, so they've got somewhere to track you down and kill you.
Thank God we're doing this online where everything is recorded. Yay!
Hello, ASIO.
Just for anyone who's not aware, there's a fantastic feature on Google Hangouts which means that you can doodle on your kind of video stream. And Vikas has done a lovely and highly blasphemous doodle of himself as a particular prophet. We shall not necessarily name which one. For our safety,
It's not John Smith.
It's not John Smith. It's not Jesus Christ. It's not Allah. I don't know any of the other prophets because I'm a heathen and an atheist and I don't know whatever else is.
Look, the point is...
Well, I can tell you unequivocally that prophet is theft.
and I think we've crossed the line where Austen's just admitted that he's, buying into Marxism.
Secret communist Austen Erickson.
I'm not a
one of the things, though,
I mean,
getting back to the issue, I mean, if banning offence is the consequence of publishing offensive cartoons, I mean, without being too technical-minded about it, and at the risk of stating the obvious, isn't that basically what they were trying to do anyway? I mean, ban something that offended them, with pretty, guns and so on. So
I'm not sure that banning something that offended them is actually the point. I think there's probably many other things that have offended them, and it's kind of lashing out as a result of that. I think there's also some complex socioeconomic factors. The less young men in particular have to do by way of jobs or by way of sport or something to keep them busy. Vital signs for the
and you can go back to Adam and Eve and say that it was all God's fault for that particular incident with the snake and so on. But
well, look, I'm simply saying that the cartoon may well be an excuse.
I disagree. I think
probably it is.
Well, in what sense? In what sense is it an excuse? I mean, it's something that clearly activated them, unlike any other target they chose. It's a target they chose because that target was doing something that offended them. I mean, yes, they're Islamic extremists. They've already been converted to the cause. They're already going to do something. But the target they chose is clearly symbolic, not just an excuse.
Well, I wonder if it's not an attempt to get the biggest audience possible.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
Attack journalists, attack the media, and the international media is going to run to their side. In the same way that simply doesn't happen when you attack school kids in Peshawar or the giant massacre in, I think it was Nigeria, by Boko Haram.
They did very well. The terrorism is propaganda, and they did well, but they still chose the target for a reason.
Yeah, sorry, sort of to tack on the Zeev side here, but I don't think necessarily having ulterior motives like trying to get the biggest exposure possible necessarily negates the fact that the target was selected specifically because they had done something offensive against the Muslim community. I think that they were possibly chosen because they thought this might be a unifying factor to Muslims in the Middle East, maybe, and perhaps particularly, of this.
It's a lightning rod issue. It's the same as
That's a good way of putting it.
Cartoons in 2006 that provoked a mass riot. Well, do the same thing 6 years later. Why not? Sorry, 7, 8.
What is time?
Thank you,
Check with the
Lara.
mayor.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not sure. That's why I asked the
Stephen
question.
Hawking.
No, but that gives us an interesting topic to talk about, though. Then, given the way that this response has been so different than what happened in 2006. So in 2006 there were riots. This time around there's been a bit of a unity rally that's gone on, and people have been quick to say, look, these guys were nuts. There were Muslim leaders coming out saying, look, these people aren't Muslims. Well, no, they weren't saying that. They were saying this is not Islam. Actually, my brother had the best quote for this. He said, if Islam is the religion of peace, shouldn't extremist Muslims be really peaceful?
Yes.
So,
Well, Islam is it's a religion of submission. Islam means submission, not peace. It's a common misconception.
I agree. But,
yeah.
Well, you know, there's as someone.
Well, look, I think the
relatives,
difference is that in this case, they felt in 2006 they felt that it was something that went unanswered. The people who did it were at large. No retribution came upon them, so it was an expression of not so quite planned rage. Actually, I mean, it was months later that these protests happened in 2006. It was quite purposely chosen to publicise it in the Middle East, but it was, I suppose, part of that kind of stirring unrest for political reasons as well, more than anything else. And I suspect the reason that it didn't happen this time around is because this time around people weren't really organising it in the same way. Perhaps it was just a group of guys, quite possibly, you know, linked to a particular Islamic terrorist group, but not part of a broader mass movement or political agenda.
I wonder if it doesn't have more to do with the proximity of events. I might be making the classic Australian mistake of thinking Australia is more important than it is in the scale of the world, but we are a country that thinks of ourselves as relatively protected from acts of terrorism, and whilst it is debatable whether the Sydney siege is counted as an act of terrorism, you've got that. You've had other events in the US, I think recently, Canada, and now in France. And so I think that there's been quite a lead up, and that this is also a step up in severity. And I think that might be a big part of why it's gathered as much attention, and the kind of the nature and scale of response it has from Liberal Democrats.
I mean, yeah, and also on top of that, like, you got to think, well, even if the government then doesn't go around and start censoring cartoons, you got to think about the self-censorship that comes through the threat of violence. So you think about, I mean, no matter what you thought of what Theo Van Gogh had to say, or people like him, but, you know, he was murdered because he was critical of Islam. You've got a number of people, you know, not just recently, like Alianan Hersey, is that her name? But, you know, where she's constantly under threat because she was critical of Islam. Like, if you have this situation where you think you might get murdered because you are critical of Islam, well, that's going to set people will censor themselves, which is I think it's a slightly different issue, because that comes to the issue of, well, how do you protect not just the legal notion of freedom of speech, but the actual reality of freedom of speech? Like, how do you actually make it so people feel free to express themselves, rather than, you know, just the pure issue of, well, can the government stop you from printing something that others find offensive?
I think this leads into Vikas's idea that if you are an advocate of free speech, that you have a moral obligation to, when you have a platform that you have some control over, provide a space that allows for free speech and supports the sharing of unusual views.
I'm not sure that technical distinction. I think that you can still make it, like it does in a sense, but the thing about fear of, you know, violence by Islamic extremists and fear of censorship by the state is that both of them come with the threat of violence attached. So it's not quite the same as peacefully tolerating other people's opinions and providing a platform for them.
Okay, but I think my statement is being used as a global clarifier, and you're right. It doesn't necessarily apply to the circumstance that you're talking about where you don't have the threat of violence. But I was actually coming at it from the perspective of, look, unpopular speech needs to be protected. Well, not unpopular speech needs to be protected. So unpopular speech is the one that's really under threat, right?
Mhm.
Popular speech doesn't need to be protected. It doesn't need allies because it's popular speech, right? But unpopular speech, right?
Yes.
That's what we're really talking about when we talk about freedom of speech. When we're talking about freedom of speech, we are talking about people being able to air their really unpopular opinion. And what I'm saying is, from a moral standpoint of someone who supports free speech, right? Nobody is going to be a free speech anarchist, right? But from someone who supports free speech, I think it is your moral duty to draw that line as close to that line of absolute free speech anarchy as possible, right? To be as close to saying, say what you want on my platform.
No, exactly wrong. That's where you lost me. Sure, draw the line for free speech as broadly as you can. I agree with you there, but that has nothing to do with your platform. You have no obligation under any circumstances to give someone else a platform, whether their views are popular or unpopular. If I'm a Nazi and I own a speech hall, I don't have to allow moderate people to speak there. And if I'm a normal person and I own a speaking hall, I don't have to allow Nazis to speak there. And that's exactly part of my right.
And the other thing is, because while I understand your concern, if you look at, say, the internet, I mean, the internet and just people with, internet service providers already do this. I mean, people can just pay for an internet connection, pay for
I'm
a
not
web
saying that it's not done.
All I'm saying is, thankfully, or perhaps less than thankfully, depending on your view of the opinion in question, it is quite possible to have a platform at very little cost on the internet. And it's just because people are beautifully minded to profit from one another. Yes? Not from the kindness of libertarian do we have free speech, but from the self-interest of the ISP.
Well, yes. Wait, yeah, okay. To be perfectly honest, actually, the internet sort of demonstrates what I'm talking about, though. Like, ISPs could draw that line further up the chain. But the thing is, they don't, right? And it's partly because of capitalist reasons, because they get more money. Whose fun is that?
Yeah. Please excuse me.
No problem.
One moment.
Anyway, so ISPs largely would be sort of encompassing the sort of my viewpoint. So they draw that line as close to what is, I guess you could say, socially acceptable. Right? So they draw the line as close to what is socially unacceptable as possible without crossing it to the extent where everybody's going, shut the fuckers down. And I think a large part of that has to do with the fact that ISPs are large and obviously have the ability to shake off some of the more asinine claims as, hey, you've offended this group, take all of that content down. And I think some of that has to do with the fact that the internet also has so much redundancy built into it. Nothing truly disappears from the internet. It's really like shouting into the void. But I'm coming at it from, like, take this show for example, right? So this show, I give a lot more leeway as to what is allowed to be spoken on this show. Practically to the extent where I think the only rules we have,
All hail the Lord Vikas.
Sorry, mate. Sorry, but I think the only rules we have basically relate to possibly outing some CIA agent somewhere or whatever. Like,
can I just interrupt at this point though? Just make a quick point. But notice all the people who are on this group are all libertarians. We're all pretty like-minded to begin with. Maybe some of the specifics changes. If we started inviting the socialist alternative on, it would be quite a different thing. And I think
I don't know that it would be, because I think if we invited, like, this is a libertarian space, to use the parlance, and if we invited a socialist alternative on, it would probably be to debate them as a socialist alternative or try to understand them as a socialist alternative. So one of the things I really like about this perspective is that it really strictly adheres to the idea, one of the underpinning, I think, ideas of free speech, that sunlight is the best disinfectant, and that it is, overall, we get more utility from exposing horrific views for what they are and for who holds them, and also debating them publicly, than by trying to censor them, or I'm using censor, I guess, in a social sense, by choosing not to air the views when we have the opportunity to.
And I just want to add one point quickly here. We do actually, well, at some point later on this year, you'll probably see 2 other people join us in these conversations, and they are socialists. Ooh. So yes, we will. I have opened the.
But like
the
real socialists or like libertarian socialists?
They just weren't able to join us for this episode. But I want to segue from that sort of thing about sunlight being the best disinfectant, as to show a major case in Australia, which did highlight, it actually highlighted how little we have for this appreciation of sunlight being the best disinfectant. And that's the Bolt case, right? So H and Zeev, that massive shit fight that we had about, racial vilification and, what can you actually say in the media. And I think basically the decision came down on the right technical side, because that's what the law says, but I don't think it's morally correct. And it is one of those laws that I wish we could change in this country.
Well, to point out for a moment, I mean, whether it came out on the right technical side is, I mean, the trouble with this law is that it doesn't really have a technical side. First of all, you have to ask...
I'll defer any of the technical legalities to Zeev, because he's a lawyer.
Well, I mean, first of all, you've got a section that says, all right, if you're offended, then the person who's offended you has breached the provision, provided the offence is to do with your race. Fine. We can probably make some kind of judgment call about whether someone is offended. We can say, but how is anyone else to tell when they speak that other people will be offended? There's an element of arbitrariness there. Offence is in the eye of the beholder. How do we know when it goes too far? Fine, but we can probably make a factual judgment about when someone is offended. We can do that. But the problem is that there's the free speech good faith and reasonableness exemption, right, which only applies if you've got a couple of...
faith, right? Like Christianity or Judaism or wait, what are the bad faiths again?
Sorry?
Scientology.
Yeah. Oh, right. Yeah, okay, this is really... Okay, yeah. So,
hang on. I think I've got
the problem is that what is good faith? I mean, that's totally subjective. You can say, well, he's offended as a matter of fact. You can, but he's acting in good faith. He's acting in bad faith. He's being unreasonable. At the end of the day, yes, Bolt may have made a couple of factual errors. He says that he doesn't mind. It's quite possible he made a lot. Who knows? I haven't read the judgment in Yonks. The point is, even if he did, at the end of the day, what the judge said is not, "Oh, Bolt, you've got the facts wrong." He said, "I don't like your tone, mate. You've been too sarcastic. You've been too callous to these wounded people's feelings, and as a result, I don't think you've got the right to speak." Now, how on earth can we possibly tell when someone doesn't like your tone enough? What kind of technicality
especially in a medium
is there?
like print, where you don't get immediate audience feedback as you are publishing.
Yeah,
basically.
Well, my biggest grievance with this entire thing, and this is really something Topher, Christopher, the guy who made the video for the 20, So sorry. He made this point about free speech a while ago, and it's that any free speech law can only exist to preserve the culture of that day.
Exactly.
Right? And that to me smacks of the worst sort of, I don't know how to best describe it, but like cultural stagnation. Right? Basically, you're saying these are the ideas that we have determined are the ideas of the day, and we want to preserve and enshrine those in law. And I sit there
but Vikas, don't you know how enlightened and correct we are?
Yeah, and I sit there and go,
well, I am, but everyone else disagrees with me on a lot of issues.
Huh? Yes, unsurprisingly, we all agree on these issues, which is why I was hoping there'd be some.
The thing is, I mean, there's arguments both ways for the kind of institutions that Bolt was criticising. I mean, leaving aside whether they should get taxpayer funding or what have you, I mean, you can say it's reasonable to have some kind of ethnic-based friendly organisation or scholarship or what have you, to scholarship group or grants to promote that. And if people really take the trouble to go down 1/8 a generation and, you know, kind of your great-grandparents were Aboriginal, so have a couple of grand. Look, obviously there's arguments to the contrary that maybe you're not really helping the real people in need, but at the same time there's a blurred line there, and it's worth discussing. And yeah, maybe Andrew was a bit miffed and Andrew Bolt was very critical, but it's a shame, because we should ask ourselves, are we actually helping the people we want to help?
Yeah, and actually I really don't like how the entire debate, so nothing Bolt has said is stuff that other Aboriginal elders haven't said before. So
there's a blog, what is it, Black Steam Train, very angry, much angrier than Bolt, and he posts it sometimes, pretty much the same stuff.
Yeah.
Anyway. Well, look, I'll be entirely honest. I think the Bolt case is a horse that is beyond dead, beyond beaten. It's just a fine paste on the ground right now. Anyone who's going to change their opinion about the Bolt case at this juncture is going to change it based on principled arguments about freedom of speech, not about the actual details of the case itself. I'm almost certain that is the case.
Which is a shame. Which is actually a shame, because there's the discussion that Bolt was trying to have is actually a really important discussion in the Aboriginal community. I mean, from our perspective, it's not actually that important, right? Like, we are not the beneficiaries, nor are we
Aboriginals in need, I suppose. We're not that here, so. Yeah.
Well, what I'm saying is we're not exactly hard done by the fact that these Aboriginal schemes exist, right? Like, they help Aboriginals out, but they don't do it at the expense of us, right? These are additional seats or whatever. Unless someone has knowledge contrary to that. Anyone controversial? No.
Not really.
I mean, it's a sort of...
No, honestly, I don't care about the actual case itself. I don't care very much about the stuff you were talking about because I know so little about it. Maybe it's something I should care about.
Well, I do care about... I mean, do we object to... Sorry.
I said I don't care about what he was saying so much as I care about his right to say those things. I think that's an important aspect of free speech. It doesn't matter what I feel about what he's saying. I can feel nothing. I can feel very angry. I can feel very happy. The point is that he should be allowed to have said it. And I can say that without knowing what he said. But almost.
Yeah, but I'm just coming at this from the point that his subject matter was actually something of importance to the community that he was talking about.
But that's not a good defense of freedom of speech. You should not be making the argument freedom of speech is important because what he was saying was important. That's not a free speech argument. It might be a valid argument, but it's not a free speech argument. The free speech argument is he wanted to say it. It wasn't inciting violence. He should be allowed to say it. The actually defending what he said because of what he said is not actually a free speech defense.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I think part of another sort of issue with focusing on the Bolt case, and even focusing on 18C, like, I mean, 18C is a bad law, but there's more to free speech than just that. Like,
even in the Australian legal context, yeah.
Yeah. Like, I mean, if you look at the UK, so I think probably one of the most
laws. There's any number of laws that restrict free speech.
I mean, if you look at what's happening in the UK at the moment.
Advertising restrictions as well.
Sorry?
I talk about advertising restrictions as well.
Oh yeah,
devices
plain
or on
packaging on
adult
cigarettes.
product. Yep.
Adult products. I don't know. Raunchy.
Alcohol. Times of day. I think that's a free speech restriction.
Times of
You can
day.
say it.
Oh yes.
Yeah,
Here's
adult
a
advertising
question.
is only allowed on TV after midnight. You can see
one
if
question.
you watch free-to-air TV the change in advertising nature as midnight passes.
Are
True.
public indecency laws an assault on free speech?
How broad is
I don't
your
think so. I mean,
speech?
Only a libertarian argument would pause on that question, and I love it.
yeah,
I really want it to be, but I don't know if it is.
yeah. I mean,
There's an arguable
I guess,
point of view for that.
What about my freedom to not associate with clothes?
There you go.
We
Well,
can-
I think freedom of
Alright,
association is
hang on,
another one.
I think Lee was about to say something.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, like, I mean, if you look at, so I guess a point of comparison is the UK. So I mean, I guess Australia has a lot in common with the UK, and if you look at how they've criminalised unpleasantness on Twitter, and that's what it really is. Like, people say dumb things on Twitter. I'm sure all of us say dumb things on Twitter, and yet people go to prison for it. Like, and like not insignificant. Like, there's people who've been sent to prison for like 3 or 6 months, probably even more. And I mean, I think those are the sorts of things that we have to kind of be careful we don't go down the path of. And obviously, ANC is part of that.
Well, we almost went down that path, really. Go on.
Yeah.
Well, we went
we're
further
just
down
not
that
What's
gonna
the
go down
difference,
that path.
though, between a dumb offensive thing or a thing that someone takes offense to and a threat? Because in a lot of cases,
No,
you have someone saying something that threatens
Well, it's
violence
effective-
against another person. Is that still a free speech violation?
Well, no. Hang on. They're
Depends
trying
how
to pass an anti-cyberbullying bill here in Australia with what's it, Charlotte Dawson's thing. It's
Oh,
called
God.
Charlie's
Mm.
Charlie's Law or something. I saw the
Oh.
petition for it the
She
other day.
gave as good as she got.
Yeah, probably, but clearly she took her life, so I don't think that was the case.
Well, she just had more feelings about it. That doesn't really speak to the content. But that's the problem with these laws, isn't it?
Yes,
Yeah.
true. My main objection to these laws is that they basically criminalize kids being kids. And let's face it, when you're growing up, being a bit of a jerk socially is kind of what you do.
But even when you're an adult,
You don't have
being
to tell that to a
jerk,
group of libertarians.
it's part of life. It doesn't matter how much content you try to ban. There are still innumerable ways to be jerks, and many of these ways are very valid as well. There are situations where it's completely legit to be a jerk. That's how you get people to correct their behavior sometimes, and sometimes it's their behavior that needs correcting, not your language and not your content. And that's the problem that I have with this, is that there are very legitimate reasons that we might want to say something that people get offended by, but being offended, so what? That doesn't give you any special rights.
Yep.
But
I mean,
don't
that's
we
like-
want to be in a kind and gentler society?
And there is kind
Okay,
of...
so are we going to nice people into, like, dissolving a marriage? Is that how, is that how fraught things like that are going to go? Are they going to have a calm discussion over tea? We might be of the British tradition, but we nonetheless like to display our emotions a bit more than that. Sometimes people are going to take offense to it.
No, I would not like the tea. And
I
I'll
wouldn't
keep
like the
the
tea. Tea makes me ill. Would you like a cup
That's
of tea?
sacrilege.
No.
It's fantastic.
Tea's for commos.
Oh,
There, I said it.
Whoa.
Yeah, that's
I'm
right.
triggered
Yeah.
now. You're triggering me. Jeez.
Someone call the cops.
I got my teacup right here.
As a Russian, I am a strong tea drinker, and I do feel that my ethnicity is offended.
Have I
and-
discriminated against
Yeah.
you racially?
Absolutely.
I've got
This
British
is
heritage.
18C right here.
Oh, but
Um,
Zev, you don't look Russian.
Yeah, I know.
Wow. That's racist just there.
Well, now hang on. If race is biological, then shouldn't there be a phenotype?
Ooh, getting
I know what that is.
Actually, technically, there should be.
What's
Actually,
the I feel so.
I just realized something.
This is one of the stupidities of the Bolt argument, right? Of the prosecution of Bolt for what he said. Well, I think I'll leave that one there because, as Leigh said before, the content of the speech is not really the
Actually,
point
no,
of the
no,
speech to
no.
make.
Well, no, because it does
We're
matter.
interested in this.
The content of the speech, I mean, because you have to make kind of empirical arguments. I mean, you can't just say free speech, free speech, free speech. You have to point out how pointless it is.
Well, I still can say free speech, free speech, free speech. They haven't
Well, you
banned that
can.
yet.
You have
You
that
have
right.
that right. You are allowed.
Yeah. My point is, though, I mean, I think Lara said it before as well. I mean, if you ban things, it doesn't. If you ban one article, you haven't banned the internet storm around the article. You haven't prevented.
In fact, you've amplified it. If this process aspect is
exactly,
anything
you've
to go by.
amplified it, and you've created more controversy around that article. You've created a greater exchange of ideas around it.
And you've created more impetus to do it, because there is a
Yeah.
significant contrarian population in any population, of which I am one, and the quickest way to get someone like me to do something is to tell me not to do it. It is not allowed.
Oh, absolutely. And look, I mean, there's plenty of historical examples you can pin that to. I mean, you can go down the Nazi Germany path and look at the history of the Weimar Republic and say, well, you know, Adolf's party was banned for a while. You can go through all these things and how they, how their newspapers were shut down and so on, and it didn't really do anything. It didn't really do the job. And the same thing in France. I mean, they've been banning people from speaking in France for long because it hasn't really done the job. I mean, you just can't ban everything. And yeah.
Actually, speaking of, you know, France trying to stop people talking, so good old Charlie Hebdo. Let's go back to where this all started from. In 1996, our good friends at Charlie Hebdo wanted to ban the far-right political party Front National. So, hey, isn't it interesting? Now we're all talking about
point of clarification. Did they actually want to ban the party? Or did they just say they wanted to ban the party? Because I get the impression this is an organization that says a lot of things for the sake of saying, for the sake of confronting the dominant narrative and the dominant discourse.
Well, to be fair, they should. I'd like to counter this by saying they should be allowed to say they want to ban a party. That's also part of free speech. They shouldn't be allowed to ban a party, but they should be allowed to say they are until the cow comes home.
Okay, but they did have a petition running, and they got 170,000 signatures.
That's still free speech, mate. It's only when the legislature acts on it that we have a problem.
Or when people initiate violence.
Yeah.
See, I mean, I actually
legislator acting. Am I right?
I actually would disagree with that point, because I actually think the culture, like the actual, the value, like people valuing free speech matters. Like it's not just, I think you know that just having a legal situation where you can't ban something is not going to help a situation when everybody thinks the government should be able to do that. I mean, I guess that's the reality of where the law can only do so much. If people don't actually embrace the values of freedom, then no law will stop bad things from happening. You know, so it's. I actually think this is where, you know, actually, I don't want to say appreciating offense, like actually saying, well, there is a role for offense. Like, there is a role in society for people to say ugly things. There's a role for South Park and for Cards Against Humanity and for stand-up comics who say unpleasant things about minorities. There's, you know, like there's all these things which are just really. There is, I guess, a role for Charlie Hebdo. Like it is, like. There has to be, to an extent, a willingness to say, okay, we actually welcome offence. And I think just by saying, well, we've got this legal protection, or you can ask for the ban, but we're not going to do it because there's a law saying we can't do it, that's no barrier. Because essentially, politicians run on the principle that if there's enough popular backing for what they'll do, they'll find a way to make it happen. And I mean, you look at the US, like, I mean, they have kind of worked around all sorts of aspects of their very firm, very clear protection, you know, economic and legal protections for liberty, because people wanted to ban economic stuff. People want to ban drugs. People want to do this and that, and politicians and judges will support those politicians because people want this thing. So, I mean, I think
being contrarian for a moment, there's the one good argument for a constitutional amendment to all of this is that you're, at least for some time, more likely to have lawyers being taught about free speech, and I can only regard that as a good thing because it means more people will know about what free speech means, and it means that more of them may even be on our side, and it means that, hey, those are people who are professional politicians usually, or become them, or very vocal and.
Well,
let's think about who law students anyway typically listen to, and the UN I think is a very prominent force. And free speech is listed quite early, I think, in the Convention on Human Rights. I think that's Geneva Convention. I don't know. I don't listen to the UN much. But law students and the generic leftists you find in the university studying law, who are all the A-type arts humanities people, absolutely love that organisation and they love their model UN. But as it turns out, they don't love the values reflected in it. I wonder how long that inoculative effect could last.
Well, that's the thing. Who knows? It's only speculation.
Well, I mean, it's one of those things, what's worse, being taught nothing or being taught the wrong thing? Because if you go to left-wing academics who teach law in the US, where there's, there is strong legal protection for freedom of speech, how many of them are going to be saying, yeah, but this sucks, we need to reform campaign finance so people can't speak with money? Because money isn't speech. Corporations are not real people. Like you can have all this sort of stuff that you see, railing against Citizens United, railing against all this sort of stuff. Like, what's
they
worse?
find ways to diminish it. Usually it's private property rights, so you have free speech zones, which I find fascinating. The other one is to dismiss the founding fathers' intention. The First Amendment was never meant to exist in a context of Twitter and Facebook and instantly being able to broadcast your views.
I actually like that argument. I actually really like that argument.
There should be no taxation on words. That's what free speech means.
No,
You should also not be paid for your words. There should be no journalists.
I actually really like that argument that, hey, free speech was intended at a time when, Twitter and all of this didn't exist, because Antonin Scalia, who is this, I don't like Antonin Scalia, right, because I don't like the originalist argument. But that is the originalist argument. Right? There's no way the Founding Fathers could have envisioned Twitter. There's no way the Founding Fathers could have envisioned Facebook. Therefore, it doesn't apply to Facebook or Twitter. That is the original.
Well, Scalia would say that's not true because it's just a means of communication. He's not quite that off the rails. He's got a reasonable point of view. He's just looking at it as essentially the Constitution as a historical document, and he's just trying to apply everything by analogy from the ideas put forward there.
It is much more fun when you go off the rails. Trust me.
Okay. What does that even mean?
No. This is just the point that I used to get stuck into with law students. I don't I don't tend to like the originalist.
Look, I
think what we've established
I don't
here
like it either because
it
hates freedom sometimes. Yes.
Yeah.
I hate them. I hate lawyers, I hate law students, and I hate lawyers.
Yeah. But anyway, look,
don't worry, you're in good company.
We've had a lot of fun.
Had a lot of laughs.
I think
said a lot of offensive things.
I hope
exercised our freedom.
Yeah.
Shit, fuck, cunt.
Titties!
Just remember, the Vikas is the one who drew Muhammad, not us. So firebomb his place, please, not mine.